So, this should be video 4. In this video, I wanted to talk about control, in particular controlling others. Um, if you haven't heard my other commentary on control, you can go to my website and there's a link that says something like more videos or videos. And if you scroll toward the bottom, you'll see a character named Prisoner Yuichi, and he has some things to say about control. And so I won't repeat those comments. Uh, but anyway, so for anyone who's reflected on this topic, I think a commonly held idea is that one cannot control others. Or some might say one should not control others, but I think most people say one has no control over others. Some people might go so far as to say one is powerless over others. But I'll just stick to the statement, one cannot control others, or I cannot control others. Now, if one takes that comment as a description of how things are, I think it's quite easy to see that it's an incorrect statement. Yeah. For example, if I were to go out and murder somebody, I will have caused their life to end. I will have ceased them, their existence. That's the ultimate form of control. In a less extreme sense, for example, if one went out and kidnapped somebody and threw them in a basement or dungeon until their death, that's just as strong, almost as strong an attempt in execution of control. One has taken away all physical freedom, or a lot of physical freedom, from that person. In an even milder way, for example, you could befriend somebody, find out about their insecurities and anxieties, and then make fun of them in public. And that person will have all sorts of feelings that they likely don't want to feel, and along with feelings of betrayal. And again, one could say that you've asserted control over their emotional welfare. And some might say you've traumatized them. So that's a lot of control that's possible. I think control works in a positive sense, but I won't get into that. The whole point being that the statement, one cannot control others, or I cannot control others, is actually factually and objectively incorrect, at least in an everyday sense. So then, why do people say that? What should one do when one hears someone else say that? Argue and say you're an idiot, like that's incorrect? I would say no. My thought is one should hear that statement in the same way that one hears the Four Noble Truths, and how I suggested one react to the poem that was in part 1, the Robert Browning poem, which is that it's a statement made by someone who has arrived at a certain place. I would say a place of a place, a person who has either arrived at or glimpsed a certain level of peace and inward freedom, and from that place has spoken a truth as seen from that particular state of mind or state of being that says, if I want to maintain this peace and this level of inward freedom, I cannot control others. In other words, I would say it's a prescriptive statement and less a descriptive statement, or one ought to take it less as a descriptive statement. Because in terms of everyday reality, one would say that, yeah, that conflicts with everyday understanding of how people are. But perhaps for someone who's seen a little bit more clearly, in fact, it is a descriptive statement. But for now, I'd like to just categorize it as a prescriptive statement. So that's control. Why? Because if I act believing that I can control others, and I start acting on it, and I act and start trying to assert control over others, there's a number of things that happen. One is now my sense of self, or my sense of peace, my sense of happiness is going to be dependent on the behavior of another human being. And people are fickle. In other words, they're unpredictable. So then my happiness and peace are all hinging upon something that's entirely fickle. So Therefore, my peace and happiness are tenuous. They will be flimsy, not very stable. Second, it's very energy intensive. Because it's energy intensive, I won't have the energy to then work on my own mind, work on my own heart, work on my own life, pursue projects that may have meaning for me, because all my energy is being squandered in trying to assert and continue to assert control over someone else or other people. But if I can adopt that as a view, I cannot control others, and just allow others to be, then there's a greater chance of happiness and inward freedom, because now other people can do whatever they're going to do. And there's no sense of I'm involved in what's happening. I'm present and I can witness and I can observe, but my well-being, my sense of emotional happiness isn't tied to their actions. One can allow others to be. So this notion of control, again, to sort of summarize, I would say, is the other thing I want to say is, in the video that I referred to at the beginning of this video, the videos by Prisoner Yuichi, I think the main point I make is control is a viable short-term strategy. So in the short term, it's possible. But in the long term, it's a terrible strategy for the reasons I've already talked about here. And because it's a terrible long-term strategy, one ought not partake in it just for the short-term gains, because it can be easy, if one is a bit on the unconscious side, to delude oneself or to fall into a kind of a denial where one starts believing that control is actually working, because in the short term it'll have an appearance of working, but in the long run it won't, and one will miss out on the long-term understanding of control. I mean, like a very obvious example is if I have a gun that's loaded and I know how to use it, I can assert short-term control over just about anybody. I could point it at their head and say, you'd better do what I tell you to do, or I'm going to blow your head off. And they'll very likely do what I tell them to do in the short run. But as soon as I don't have the gun, let's say someone comes along and kicks the gun out of my hand, or I fall asleep because I ate a big lunch or something, like I just did about 30 minutes ago, and then so I just start taking a nap, the person's going to kick my ass, because he's going to be like, you motherfucker, you made me do this and that, which I never wanted to do in my life, and now that you don't have a gun and you're falling asleep, I'm going to kick your ass and kill you. So the gun helped me to assert short-term control, but in the long run, it caused my death, or it caused me to get beaten up. And I would say that that's a metaphor, or rather an analogy, for how control is in general. That any attempt at control of others creates a kind of a very strong and obvious or very subtle kind of resentment, hatred, anger, or whatever. And there's always a repercussion, whether it comes from that person or from life itself. So again, control has an appearance of working, and some of us can become deluded that it's working. But if we awake to the fact, or we start observing reality for what it is, we begin to see that it actually is unsustainable. Therefore, it's not a good strategy for living. So a better way to live life is to simply adopt the view that I cannot control others. And one sort of stays out of that mess entirely. Yeah? So that's the end of this video.